Good morning and welcome to Friday. I trust that you have had a great week, and between the devotions and your own private practice and the challenges that you would have had as the days went by, that there would have been some growth, some important growing areas in your life during this past week. We are at Friday. It's another unit. It's the end of the second week of Lent, and we come up to the weekend, and we can take a kind of a breather at this time as we prepare ourselves to go into yet another week of Lent. I trust that you may use this Sunday as truly a time to just relax and to assimilate all that you have received during the past week and see where your growing areas are, how God has been using you, what God has been doing with you, and how you have been challenged in your journey, but that you've been making it and you are growing day by day. So today now, we just want to do our usual and to come into our place of tremendous peace and tranquility and see how God seeks to use us this morning and what God is saying to us. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. With that little prayer resounding in our hearts, we bring our attention to our hearts. And we are mindful of God's presence with us, enfolding us, surrounding us, protecting us, watching over us. Never alone, never without the divine presence. And today I want us to think on this, that no matter where we are or what situation we're in, we are never without the divine presence. And this is not something that is special to me or to you, to the believer, to the Christian as opposed to the Jew or to the Hindu. This is something that is true of every single living entity in our world. The divine is present in all places, in all circumstances, with each and every one of us. What a loving presence. What a gift. To know that God is with us all. To know that God does not show partiality. He does not prefer one over the other. You're all of God. And so today, I just want us to grasp that. And I know when we look at the world and we look at all the various challenges in our world and various things that occur, you wonder. But you would also notice that as we wonder, that wonder has everything in it. It has successes of persons and accomplishments, and it has failures It has oppression, it has abuse, it has everything. And God is in all of it. And sometimes we really need to remember this and allow it to sink in that God is in all of it. God is in the oppressor and the oppressed. God is in the abuser and the victim. God does not shy away from any of the circumstances of his children. God is present at all times. And so we kneel, we bow the knee in acknowledgement of that presence. Whether we are worthy or unworthy, whether we are wealthy or poor, whether we are an abuser or an abused, we are in God's presence. And we kneel. We kneel acknowledging the divine. And as we kneel acknowledging the divine, we ask that we may release our own small concerns, which might be causing us to play one role over another. We ask that we may release those little concerns and embrace the larger picture of God's love and God's presence. Jesus calms the storms. He calms the storms in our lives. He brings peace into our presence. And so Mark says that when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Thanks be to God. are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? Why are you afraid? Have you ever asked yourself that question in the midst of some challenge? Why am I afraid? What is it that I'm fearful of? In moments like that, our minds run away and we create all manner of scenarios in our minds. The disciples did say to Jesus, "Do you not care that we are perishing?" It was a done deal. And oftentimes we are in certain circumstances and all we can see is the worst case scenario. And we focus on that scenario. But I wonder if we realize the power within the human person. In this story, a windstorm arose and presented itself to the disciples. The disciples did the normal thing and they went into a place of fear. And all that they could manage was more fear. Until that fear got so much that they went to the rabbi and they said to the rabbi, "Are you not concerned that we are doomed, we are perishing?" The rabbi too is confronted by the same windstorm. But rather than go into fear, he went into his power. And he says, "Peace, be still." What is the difference? Both were presented with the same circumstance. You see, when we read this story, one of our challenges is that we read more into the story than the story has. When we read the story, we read into the story that there is Jesus, the man who rose from the dead, the man who ascended to heaven, the man who is the Son of God. What Jesus presented to his disciples was a man who came to know what it meant to be truly human. Hence, when he spoke with them and he asked, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Jesus didn't say, "Well, I can understand you're being afraid because after all, you aren't the Son of God. You aren't the one who will be raised from the dead and ascend to heaven." No, he said, "Do you still have no faith?" Jesus is challenging his disciples and in a sense laying before them the two options. You can go into fear or you can go into faith. Excuse me. You can go into fear or you can go into faith. Which will you choose? It's choice. But I know, yes, for us, fear is such a second nature that we don't really get a chance to go into faith. And the reason we don't get a chance to go into faith is because we practice going into fear. But at the moment that something presents itself, there is a moment there where we can decide. I always equate it to a child. A child is running on the pastor and it's near its parents or other bigger persons. The child falls and scuffs its knees. The child rises up. It realizes that it is injured. It feels a little pain. And the first thing it does is that the child checks with the significant others around it. Now, in that short space of time, depending on what response the child picks up, the child will either just offer a little murmur or the child will go into massive breakdown. It is that little moment, that little space where a choice has to be made. Do I accept this and make it into something different? Or do I see this as destructive and allow it to take over myself? And this is where our faith comes. We've got to try to engineer ourselves in a way that that space between our moment of engagement or experience and the decision, the choice to be made, we've got to create more and more space in between there so that we don't go into the reflex action, but we go into the response. Jesus responded, the disciples reacted. And so when we hear that song, "Oh, for a faith that will not shrink, though pressed by many a foe, that will not murmur at the brink of poverty or woe," it's a something that gets in there and allows us not to go into despair, but allows us to stand in our power and to be able to act out of our power. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus stood in his power and he acted out of his power. We saw this again with Jesus walking to the disciples on the sea and Peter saying, "Lord, if it is you, bid me come to you." And Jesus said, "Well, come." So Peter, in the faith of that moment, steps out of the boat and begins to walk on the water. But he thinks, "Oh my, what am I doing?" And where there was faith and where he was walking in his own power, he became fearful. Fear broke through and he began to sink. So these two stories tell us that we have it within us. If we can only learn how to see fear as a choice and not as our reality. If we can step back somewhat in our various circumstances and choose. And perhaps what may be helpful for us is to practice in everything, in every instance that occurs. Don't take anything for granted. Don't operate out of habit. But in everything, stop and choose. Consciously choose. We go to the restaurant and we consciously choose what we want to have. Even if it's a case that we go the same place and we buy the same thing all the time because we like it, still consciously choose. So that I get in the habit of recognizing that there is always choice. Nothing is automatic. There is always choice. And if I can have choice, then I can choose differently. But if I don't have choice, then I can only behave from an automatic place. And this is important. This is crucial to our journey in faith, that we must have choice. Because choice allows us to move in a different direction. Choice allows us to calm the stormy winds.